So, hi everyone, and welcome back to Relocate Guru, the app to help you feel like a local and love where you live, no matter where you move to. Today, I'm really excited to share a conversation with you that I'm having with Mariam, who is joining us from Ghana, and she has just published her very first book, Messy Mobile Life, which I think a lot of people here can resonate with, and just the craziness of moving internationally, raising kids, like in different places, and multiculturalism, and raising kids with multiple languages, and just the chaos of normal family life, and with the added complexities of doing that on the move. So thank you so much, Mariam, for joining us today.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
So we've spoken before, sort of like when I visited Mariam in Dubai, and we shared some of the story there. But to recap for everyone, can you just sort of like give a quick summary of like what led you to this point into writing your very first book?
Sure, I'll be very happy to do that. Thank you, Nicole, for having me. It's great that we get a chance to chat, and each time we're in different continents and different corners of the world. What led me to writing this book about all about living this messy mobile life is, of course, leading a very messy mobile life myself, and sort of trying to figure out how to tackle all the different challenges that come your way, and also to enjoy the opportunities that living a global life brings your way. And it's important to sort of do both. Oh, that's really ironic. As I'm saying this, there's like an airplane just flying right. And can you hear that? Oh boy. All right. So I am someone who has moved around a lot. I grew up initially as an expat child and moved around for my dad's career. We moved from Bahrain. We used to live in Manama when I was born. I was born in Pakistan because my parents were worried they wouldn't get me a passport if I was born in Bahrain. So I was born in Pakistan and then initially lived in Manama in Bahrain, and then the United States, and then eventually back in Pakistan, which is where I predominantly grew up. My parents were done with expat life, and after 10 years said, right, we're going back home. So that was a little bit about my childhood of moving around. And then as an adult, when I was 19, I left Karachi and went to the US to study for college at university. And I also went to England, which is where I met my husband, who is German and Italian. And together we started living this really complicated life of moving around a lot, and not just moving from one country to the next, but constantly learning new cultures, incorporating who we are into this mix, and learning new languages, and having children in different corners of the world, and sort of figuring out, right, well, we're a family and we're a globally mobile family, and how do we live this life? How do we figure out how to make this life work for us? And our adventures have sort of taken us, from Germany to Denmark to Singapore to the UAE, and currently we're living in Ghana in West Africa. And Ghana is my 9th country to live in. So it's really been this incredible journey of living this very messy global, life. And it's only now that I'm able to sit back and sort of figure out, what have I learned and how can I help others who are living this crazy life to sort of benefit from it, and how can we help each other in navigating our way through it. So that was the story in a nutshell.
And it's like anybody listening to your story is just like, oh my goodness, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
I know.
When anyone asks me sort of like who my ideal customer is for Relocate Guru, it's like, it's this lady right now. Because you've gained all this wisdom and knowledge, and it's like, well, if we can make life easier from moving around and make it seamless so you can feel at home no matter where you move to, that's kind of the point of the
Absolutely.
because everyone should feel at home and feel like they're belonging. But like, you've picked up so many tips and strategies to navigate this messy mobile life. So we're going to dive in today into some of Mariam's like top 3 tips of how to how to live to make the most of your life abroad and to get through the challenges and make more opportunities about that. So yeah, so dive right in, Miriam, sort of like what.
Thank you, Nicole. Well, okay, so because I talk a lot, and because I talk really fast, I'm gonna just keep it down to 3 tips, okay? And then of course, I'm happy to elaborate on them. But I think it's important to sort of just set the tone and say, well, first of all, my first tip would be, if you are contemplating living abroad, if you are thinking about moving your family from country A to country B, okay? There are a lot of places where you will get a lot of the practical advice, the checklist. Nicole has a really good checklist as well, by the way, on Relocate Guru. Check that out, which really helps. So there's a lot of different aspects that you need to tackle, right? There's the practical aspect, there's the admin, the bureaucracy, the paperwork, and then there's, of course, the aspect of what is this move going to do to you and to your family? Who are you going to become at the end of your 4 years in China? All right. And these are the questions we don't think about when we're leaving or before we're leaving. We're too busy figuring out how to get, our stuff from A to B and how to choose the right school. And I talk about all of this as well, but I feel like the first tip for living a messy mobile life is to be very clear on what you're getting yourself into. Okay, and I say this with all the right intentions because I feel like people will tell you, oh, it's very doable, so and so moved from this place to this place, and you probably just heard my story and be like, oh, well, she's moved everywhere, and if she can do it, what's the big deal, and I'm sure I can do it. And I'm going to tell you that moving is a big deal. In fact, it's the biggest deal out there, and anyone who underestimates it is just setting themselves up failure, right? So don't underestimate it. And my first tip is, in a nutshell, this. Things will get messy, okay? If you're gonna leave the comfort of your home and go try to make a life in a different place, your life will become messy. It doesn't matter how organized you are. There are certain things you can't control. You'll be living in a different culture. You need to learn how to function in a different culture. Most likely you will have to learn a new language. Most likely your kids, if you have any, will be going to a different school. There may be a shift in curriculum. They may have to switch school systems. They'll have to make new friends. You have to make new friends. You need to figure out who to call to get curtains put up in your home, something I still haven't quite figured out. There's so much coming at you. So do yourself a favor and don't be under any disillusionment or any sort of grandiose ideas that it's going to be easy. It's not. Your starting point should be, this is not going to be easy. This is going to be a great challenge and a great adventure, and I want to enjoy it, but I'm also going to be kind to myself and give myself a break because I know I will struggle. I know I will have days that things are not going to go the way I want them to. This is not going to be easy. It will be messy. So the first tip is acknowledge that your life will be messy.
And I think that's really important because we get into this sort of like, oh yeah, we can be all organized and have everything on spreadsheets and like checklists and we got everything scheduled and lined up. Life doesn't work like that. Like you found out yourself, sort of like you expect to be moving in on a certain date and the shipment doesn't arrive, and all the plans just go out the window.
Absolutely. And I think we are our own worst critic, and the way we handle a move is extremely crucial. The way we teach our kids to handle a move is extremely crucial. And I talk a lot about this in the book because if you're not real about this process and if you don't do it the right way, statistics and research and studies show that, if you're not taught how to move in a healthy way, dealing with the emotions, the gains, the losses, saying the goodbyes, processing the upheaval, it might come back to haunt you in later years. So this is very important that we all do this. And this is what everybody who's moved around will tell you, that these are the important things. Nobody will put this on a checklist for you, but this should be something that you do for yourself, right? Your relocation company may not put this on the checklist they give to you, but this is something every family should learn how to do for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's really the first tip, is to set the base. go in with the right mindset. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And I don't want to take away from that either, because half of it is the fun and the adventure and just the everyday magic of like, oh my God, is this the right bus that I'm on? And how do I know where my stop is coming? Because I don't speak any Danish, and I try to speak Danish and I can't pronounce the name of the stops, or nobody knows what I'm saying, right? So it's about both. Having the right attitude towards it is key.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And it's not the same as visiting somewhere.
No, no.
And it's like, just because you may have traveled a lot, it's not the same as figuring out like the day-to-day sort of like how to find toothpaste in the supermarket that doesn't have the brand that you normally use, or
Yeah.
like finding the right cereal that your kids love that doesn't exist in your new place,
Right.
or under a different name, a different packaging. And it things that take forever to figure out, that just adds to that level of complexity of things that are already very complex.
Absolutely. So this was just setting the stage. And then once you're living abroad and once you're moving from one country to the next, I think there are three main messy factors that you and your family encounter. And I'm happy to talk about this because I talk about this in the book as well. The first messy factor is culture. And a lot of people will tell me, oh, well, me and my partner, we both come from the UK, we're moving to Japan, and we can figure this out. Yes, you can. The important thing to do is to make sure, you know who you are culturally speaking. All right. And that means knowing what has your culture taught you, what's important in your culture, and what are the things that you do, whether it's food or etiquette or mannerisms or anything that we do, which is directly an influence of your culture. And this could even mean your opinion on certain things, your political opinion, just how you view the world. All right, it's all culture matters. Okay, culture and what our friends and family think really influences us. And there's no point in our life does this become more apparent than when you uproot yourself and take yourself out of that culture and go live in a culture that may be quite different than what you are used to. Okay, so before you then start questioning, oh my God, why do I do things? Start having the discussion before and know, who are you? What's important to me? What does it mean if I'm British? Or what does it mean? Like, how does that reflect in my values and how I raise my kids and what kind of a global life I want to live, So the idea is to be clear about how your culture shapes you. And then when you go and live in different cultures, then you start realizing, oh, well, in Japan, they were doing things this way, and this is how Japanese society has affected me or impacted me. And in the book, I show that I give an example of a mola. And not many people know what a mola is, but I'd like to just explain that a mola is basically a shirt, right? Just like the shirt that I'm wearing here. It's a shirt that's particularly made in South America, and it's made in a very unique way. They take lots of different layers of different colored fabrics, and they layer them one on top of the other. And the thread is extremely fine, so it looks invisible, right? And they use reverse applique, so then you turn it around and you see that there's a design, right? You see the design forming, and that's how a mola is made. And what I do in the book is I tell international families, you are making your own mola, okay? All the different moves that you're making are all the layers that get stitched in, okay? And some of them are easy to stitch in, and some of them are really, really hard. Some of them hurt. Some of them, seamlessly incorporate into your design, and some of them may not, right? And the mola is constantly changing, and I'll just get to that in a little bit. But coming back to the culture, what I tell families is that if your first messy thread is going to be culture and how that impacts you, think of your cultures as the fabric of your mola. It's your basis. It's what you're going to be building upon, okay? It goes right to the core of who you are and your family and what kind of cultural values you are sort of exhibiting and practicing, okay? So a lot of people disregard culture. especially people in our generation will be like, culture isn't important. And as someone who's married outside of her culture, I can tell you that culture is extremely important, not because it's going to stop you or prohibit you. It's just your biggest clue to who you are. So again, coming back to living a globally mobile life, you need to be confident in who you are. So look at your cultural values, look at what you've been taught, and that's the basis. That's the basis of your mola, and it's the basis of your international life, right? So that's my first tip. Or
Fantastic.
actually, was it the second one, Nicole? I guess. Well, the first one was a sort of general.
Yeah, the general sort of like, be prepared, like
Be prepared.
it's gonna be crazy, and be aware of that, and don't
Right.
underestimate the crazy. And then the second one is, don't underestimate the impact of your culture. And even if you've moved around your whole life from when you're a kid, like that will have an impact on your culture as you were growing up. But understand sort of like your culture and sort of like your family, like your beliefs deep down.
Absolutely.
uh
Absolutely.
is really important. It's like growing up sort of like my family is sort of like, yes, we're British, but my family was like brought up all over the place. Like my grandfather was from Grenada, and
Mm-hmm.
his side of the family was from the Caribbean, and like my auntie lived in Canada, and I had family kind of, yeah, scattered all over the place. So it was just like, yeah, but the core is kind of like, yes, but we're British. So it kind of
Right.
sort of, and my uncle's Indian, and but it was kind of like, it's under the Commonwealth, so it all counts.
Right. We all play cricket, right?
Yeah, we all
Mm-hmm.
play cricket. It's good. Um, and yeah, it's funny sort of like speaking to my uncle Richard, who sort of like sets up like the carnivals and things like that in Nottingham, and brings in that Caribbean culture in, and it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, different. So it's like understanding that. And it's like when I went to visit my aunties in Grenada, it was just like, I feel at home, and I'd never been here before. It was like
Right.
really bizarre, because it's like I'd never been here before, but it felt like home. And
Yeah.
and it's like, and then understanding that part of my side of my culture, and sort of like seeing where my grandfather was born and things like that, it did kind of give me a sense of belonging, which I hadn't experienced for.
Oh, that's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I think culture is really the clue to who you are. And of course, if you're living a globally mobile life, you're already becoming multicultural, whether you know it or not, right? Some of us are a bit more conscious of it, perhaps,
And my nan
or some of us are, you know.
so I need to see if I go to Dublin, and if I have the same experience if I go to Dublin. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's sort of like the culture of your family sort of like gets intertwined, sort of like, no matter how, like,
Hmm.
back then there wasn't such a word as expat. Really.
No, no. I think to be honest, and I wanted to make this point. So I know the globally mobile world is very much divided into an expat, an immigrant, and third culture kid, and third culture adult, and how we define moving and the labels we identify with. There's so many, right? And what I wanted to do was essentially show that it doesn't matter who you are or where you're moving from or to, or it doesn't even matter if you're just going to make one move and then settle down. Like, let's say you really are just going to immigrate to, from the Caribbean to the UK, and you're going to settle down there. You're still making your mola. You still have the fabric. You still have to figure out how you're going to, stitch your story together, right? So I wanted the mola to apply to everybody, regardless of how you move, how many times you move, where you're moving from, whether you're a TCK or you're not a TCK, or you're an expat or you're an immigrant. Because think about it. Think about a typical, let's say an Indian or a Bangladeshi immigrant family who is arriving in Scotland. And what's their cultural heritage? Are they just supposed to forget that from one day to the next? No, of course not. They've got the language, they've got the culture, and they've done a move. So there you go. They've got all the three aspects of the mola right there. And I think it's important to sort of have this vocabulary that we can then say, you know what, regardless of your story or my story or all the details, we're all building the same thing. We're all making our mola, right? Some might be a bit more complex. If I've done 9 international moves and I'm living in Ghana as my ninth country, maybe I've got 9 different layers in my mola. And you know, maybe I'll show you 1 or 2 when we meet, and the others are lurking underneath, right? And they may come out in different unexpected ways when I least expect it, right? We've all got that. So it's important to remember that as people who are moving, we're actually all stitching our own stories, right? That's really crucial. The second point I wanted to talk about was the language, was, you know, multilingual families and families who are learning different languages, whose kids are being schooled in a different language than the one they speak at home. Language is a huge, huge part of our global experience, right? It's one of the things that we struggle with, but it's also one of the best gifts to be able to speak and to learn a different language. And I feel like books on globally mobile families haven't addressed this. You know, it's either just a book on how to raise a bilingual child, but then it's just about that, or a book on raising multilingual children, but it's just about that. And what I wanted to do, and what I think families need to do, is to figure out and to incorporate their language goals, make it a part of the discussion on living this globally mobile life, okay? If you're gonna talk about being an expat, and you're gonna talk about relocating, and you're gonna talk about moving, let's talk about language, okay? Because that's often one of the biggest things, you know, in shaping our experience, and the biggest thing that we experience. So in the book, I talk a lot about language. I talk about why it's so important. And I explain, again, going back to the mola analogy, that your languages are the thread. They are the thread that you're using to stitch your story together. And if you aren't aware of what's going on, and if you don't have, you know, proper language goals set out for your kids, for yourself, it really will be messy. It will be chaotic. And it's very important that you sit down and try to figure out, what are our language goals as a family? If we are a Danish speaking family and we are living in, you know, Singapore, how important is it that my children learn Danish, right? How important is it that if you and your partner are from different countries and are speaking different languages, how do you do that, right? Or if you are American parents who have lived or have just moved to Norway, and your kids are being schooled in Norwegian, but you're speaking English at home, but yet you need to help them with their Norwegian homework. How do you do that? Why are we not talking about language? It's the biggest thing that sort of is our everyday, it's part of our everyday global experience. So my advice and tip is for each family to sit down and make out your language, fill out a language profile for yourself and your family to figure out what your goals are, what your strategy is, and how are you going to do this.
Because you have that in the book, like a...
I do. And of course, I've gotten a lot of help in the book from different experts. So when I talked about culture, I asked 3 great experts, 3 intercultural experts, to help me piece the narrative together and to provide their understanding and expertise to help families on how to manage effectively their cross-cultural communication. So I've asked Sunday Schneider-Bean, who runs a great group called Expats on Purpose, and she has great advice in the book. I've also asked Jerry Jones from the Culture Blend on how do you blend cultures, and he's given some fantastic advice in the book. And I've also asked Trisha Carter, who is the genius in cross-cultural communication, because she'll take a simple sentence and show you how it could be perceived in 5 different cultures, right? And together with their help, I was able to, you know, give families the kind of advice and expertise on how to manage culture and how to be multicultural in this global life. And I did the same with the languages. I asked 3 language experts, you know, people who have PhDs in linguistic science, to say, help me with, you know, giving the tips to the families on how can they do this, how can they not feel overwhelmed with their multi-literacy goals for their children, right? And what should they watch out for? How can they not get like stressed out about it and yet sort of reach their goals? And globally mobile families face a conundrum of issues as far as it comes to language. If you're someone like me who grew up bilingually and has two native languages, and is married to someone who also grew up bilingually and also has two native languages, what language do you speak? What language do you choose? I found it was almost harder to figure out what language do you let go. Letting go is a huge part of this journey as well. And some of my language experts helped me to see how do you make that decision as a family? And I've shared that in the book because I want other families to be able to benefit from how do you do this, right? What are the starting points? What questions do you need to be asking? So definitely, very much.
Yeah, so the second one is definitely working on your language. Like, um, I know sort of like some people might get worried about like, oh, how are my kids going to cope learning two languages separately, and sort of like how do we get that going? But it's like you, the kids are doing it like 5. Are they on to 6 now, or is it?
Yeah, well, I sort of share my language journey, and I share the primary languages that we speak and then the secondary languages that they're learning. And the primary languages are the ones that we stay consistent in, that are our home languages, and they stay the same regardless of where we're living or where we move to. And those are Urdu, German, and English. And then their secondary languages have been Italian, Arabic, and French predominantly, and have also included Mandarin at a certain point, right? And I talk about, just how to manage all of this and how to have realistic goals and realistic expectations, and of course, what to do when you face all the setbacks and the challenges, and your child says, "No, Mama, I want to speak to you in English because that's what my friend does," and all the normal challenges that a parent and an international family encounters. So it's really to help families figure out their own path in doing this, and how important is this to them, and if it is, this is maybe how you get started.
Because it is a huge gift, and it is a huge gift for kids to be able to have that kind of range,
Absolutely,
and it helps
absolutely. I
build
think
their mold. It
if
helps
there's
build them their own mold of like having those different viewpoints,
absolutely
languages, and experience the world from different points of view based on their language. And yeah, speaking to Mina, sort of like she was like, it's like giving me like language lessons at breakfast, and it was amazing. And it's like I feel almost a bit like gutted that I didn't get the opportunity to do more languages growing up. But yeah, it's hard, and it's like
it's very hard, and this is the point I want to make. It's incredibly hard, and I feel like giving up at least 5 times a day. I feel like just throwing in the towel, and that's what I mean. Again, remember, your life is going to be messy. This is not going to be, don't wait for someone to sugarcoat it for you and say everything will be fine, unless you figure out things for yourself and make the time to do so. You'll just be caught up in that mess, right? So it's important that you do this. It's important that you figure out how important are your language goals to you. What are your language goals? What do you want your child to be? Do you want them to be able to speak Arabic? If they grew up, let's say 8 years in Abu Dhabi, is that important for you, or is that not important for you? Do you want them to be able to listen to Al Jazeera and see the same news, from the Western media and from Arab-speaking media, and then be able to detect where the bias is, or if there is a bias? This is what living abroad does to us. It shows us the same thing and helps us to do perspective taking, helps us to figure out, how we view the world, right? And language is crucial in this. It's really crucial. And if you talk to the parents who've got older children, one of their biggest regrets is that, I wish I had spoken Spanish to them. I wish I had taught them French. I wish they could, go to Italy and speak Italian with my relatives. And it's the biggest regret. So if you're setting out on this journey, my biggest advice and biggest tip is language. Don't forget about your language. Whatever your home language is, whatever your partner's language is, whatever the language of the country that you're moving to is, sit down and figure out what do you want from it, so that you don't have any regrets. And it's not going to be easy. Please don't think it's going to be easy, but it will be the most challenging thing that you can possibly, and rewarding thing that you can possibly do.
That's amazing. So going on to the third factor, the final factor.
Yes, the third and final tip is, of course, all about moving. And it's about actually handling mobility, and what does mobility do to you and your parenting? What does it do to you as a couple, as a family unit? And I think sometimes we're so caught up in the day-to-day, running around and business, that we don't quite take the time to realize how is all of this changing who we are. Okay, your identities are changing, your perspectives are changing, your nationality may be more complicated now. You've got kids born in different countries. You ask them where's home, and maybe everybody in your families picks a different place, right? So moving adds a lot of different layers to who we are as people, okay? And that's what I show you in the book. I show you that when you're stitching your mola, your shirt together, all the moves, all the different moves you've done, whether they're domestic, whether they're international moves, they all form the layers of your mola, okay? And what exactly goes into that? I mean, it's a huge bunch of things. It could be the neighborhood you lived in. It could be the pet you had. It could be your colleagues at work. It could be the language you learned. It could be the good experiences. It could be the bad experiences. All of everything that happens to you when you live in a place is what you're stitching in, okay? And what I try to show families is that it's important that you do stitch it in, the good and the bad, okay? Let's say you were a Swedish woman, a Swedish family living in India, and you were afraid to walk, let's say, certain parts at night, for instance, right? Because a lot of places aren't safe for females at night, or there's rape, or there's different dangers, or let's say you're living in a hugely populated city in China, and the pollution is your biggest challenge. Or let's say you're living in South Africa and the gender inequality is what's bothering you. You face a lot of complicated issues regardless of where you move to. Or if you're like me and you're living in Ghana and you suffer from acute expat guilt because you're on this expat package, and then you see the difference between yourself and the locals, and it's hard to reconcile it. It truly is. So you're dealing with a whole host of things, right? And what I'm trying to tell international families is that stitch all of this into your mola. Make it part of who you are, the good and the bad, because it's all going to affect you. Don't think just because you leave China after 3 years and then that's it. No, it'll still continue, and it might even affect your next move. For the next move, you'll be like, okay, I don't want to live in a very, in a densely populated city where pollution is going to be a major concern, right? The point is to see how do your different layers make you who you are as a family, and how do they make you the person and the family that you are and that you are today. So those are the kind of questions that I encourage people to think about and to reflect in the book, because again, if you don't do that, A, you're not getting full value out of your international experience, and B, we tend to look at our lives in this disjointed way, like, oh, I lived for 4 years in Denmark, I did 3 years in Singapore, I did 2 years in Berlin, and yeah, but I mean, your life is continuous, right? So what are you building as a result of all of these experiences, right? So that's sort of what I encourage you to think about and to give attention to, and to ask yourself, ask your family members, what's important to us? How do we maintain our values regardless of where we're living? How do we be a family? Because maybe that might change as well. So all of these are really good questions to think about. And then of course, the last message is that don't be afraid to show who you are, right? Because a mola is something, it's not really a shirt that you make and then you leave it in the closet where it just gathers dust. No, you've got to wear your mola every single day proud. And the idea for globally mobile families is that you have to show your mola to lots of different people, all right? You have to show your mola to international schools. You have to show your mola to relocation companies. you have to show your MOLA to HR of companies that send you abroad, or to organizations and the corporations that are moving you from point A to point B. You have to show your MOLA to global mobility specialists and say, these are the things, these are the challenges, this is the support we need. You need to show your MOLA to your friends and family back home, right? You need to show your MOLA when you repatriate. That's actually one of the biggest, that's the time when we're the most afraid to show who we are, because we're so desperate to fit back in and show that, look, my 5 years in Paris didn't really change me that much. I'm still the same Nicole, right? No, you're not. And don't try to hide it. And people will think you're boasting. People will think that every time you name drop, some faraway place, that's you showing off. It's not. But we need to teach ourselves and our kids, how do you take all your international experiences and then share it in an appropriate way with the appropriate person, depending on who your audience is. So you've got to do that. So that's really what it's all about. Once you know who you are, once you've figured out culture, language, mobility, then you're in a good position to share that and use it in a way that it works for you and helps you and your family in your experience abroad.
And these are really huge questions, like whether you're moving or not. It's like, who do you want to be as a family? It's like, that is a huge one to do. Is like, and it's like, it can be quite overwhelming. Like, where do you even start? And like, when you're overwhelmed with all the practicalities of living somewhere anyway, to sort of like, I don't want to even unpack that box right now of that question because I can't handle it. But it's really important to address it. And it's like, when you're surrounded by boxes anyway, it's like to have the big scary box of like, I've got to delve into all these big life questions of like how you want to be. And like, and I loved how you sort of like brought up the privilege side of things as well, and the difference in the language between expat and immigrant and all of that. It's like that stuff that doesn't get talked about, but it's really important that to know that we are kind of going through all the same process. We still come through the same challenges, and it is important to recognize privilege where it is, and like how that fits into us as people, and how you reflect upon that is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's about getting us to sort of just be very real about our experiences, and sort of say, look, who are we becoming? Okay, and to sort of take a long-term approach to it, because a lot of people, they go into expat life or they make a move and they don't really foresee how that one move is going to affect them for the rest of their life. Okay, that one move may mean you have at least one move back, or not, or you continue moving and then you become a serial expat, or you keep doing you become a career expat, or you keep on adding more and more complexity. So regardless of what you do and where you go, your story continues, right? And it's sort of to encourage people to think about their whole story, and to think that every experience, expatriation, repatriation, whatever it is all, different chapters of basically just the same story, just different layers in your MOLA. So you got to think about it, and you got to think about what each layer is doing to you as a person, and what each layer is doing to you as a family. And the funny thing is, Nicole, I think that as families, we tend to not have these conversations, at a time when things are calm, and then suddenly something will happen and you realize, wait a second, me and my partner have a very different ideas. Somebody is sick, I want to get on the airplane right away, he doesn't, or vice versa, or whatever it is. And in that moment of stress, it's when these things actually, they come out, and that's when you're like, you've got the least amount of time to deal with these things. So what I do is encourage families to have conversations around what is important to them in these three areas before they find themselves in that stressful situation, because then at least all right, well, we've had this discussion, this is important to me, family is important, I don't care if I'm living 2,000 kilometers away, if something happens, I'm on the next plane out, and this is who I am, this is important to me, right? So you know what to expect, and you're not like yelling at each other in the middle of when it happens, right? Because that's how life is.
And I think we can all relate to the yelling at each other in under moments of stress in inappropriate places, because it is stressful, and like because it matters to us, and it is important to try and like box things up. It's like, oh, that was to do with the move in China, or that was to do with the move to Canada, or like, and try and ring fence it, because and we do that because that's how our brains operate and how we can organize things. But we're more and more see it as like it's a story of our life, and sort of that's it, that you're the character that evolves and grows through that story, rather than oh, he's still there. So that we can't put each move in boxes, and it's like it's all part of a continuous story that we're evolving and growing and becoming richer characters as a result, and richer people as a result.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think families and all of us can benefit so much from then seeing how, you know, we turn all of that mess into something really beautiful, something truly wonderful that we should all be proud of and not be afraid to share.
And yeah, like, and especially I think during teenage years, we get to the point where we just want to fit in and feel that sense of belonging. So you kind of hide parts of you just because you want to fit in. And it's like, well, what makes you amazing is all the stuff, the good and the messy.
And that's sort of what I try to explain in the book, in This Messy Mobile Life. I ask families, when do you feel like hiding who you are? Think about it. Like for me, if I reflect, and I have reflected in the book, it might be during a job interview where I might not mention certain parts of who I am or where I've lived. I might mention work experience, and you know, I might mention my qualifications, you know, are from here and here. Or you know, like we paint different pictures of who we are depending on social situations. Sometimes we feel comfortable enough to show who we are, and sometimes we really just don't want to show ourselves to be so different. And globally mobile people always stick out, right? If you haven't grown up in the same place and you don't have, you know, friends from childhood and all of that, you are going to stick out regardless. All right. So either you can acknowledge that and work that to your advantage, or you can brush it under the rug. And my message is always brush it under the rug, because then you're just denying who you are. Okay. Look at your mola and see what parts you show and what parts are hidden. Okay. And ask yourself why. Okay. Ask yourself, what is stopping you from, revealing, you know, the true essence of who you are, or from revealing, like I lived in Iran for 3 years and this is, you know, how it shaped me, or whatever it is. Okay. I think it's really crucial to do that, because if we don't, it's such a disservice to who we are. We're just negating everything that's, you know, happened to us. And I just wanted to mention that one of the first people who talked about a mola in terms of living a globally mobile life was a wonderful lady called Norma McCaig. And she was a third culture kid herself. And she wrote about this in the very first edition of Third Culture Kids Living Amongst Worlds, which came out in 1999. She wrote the foreword to the book. And she encouraged, at that point in her book, in that book, she encouraged TCKs to think about their mola. And what I've done is taken inspiration from her and come up with this whole mola framework for the whole family to use, because I feel like it applies to the whole family and not just to one person or to one individual. We're all affected, right? So it's important that you start viewing your experiences like that in a more, you know, from a macro point of view as opposed to a micro point of view. And that can be hugely helpful in piecing your narrative, your story together.
Exactly. And it's introduce ourselves. We try and find like this small, like one sentence snippet. And when you've got a complicated life, it's like, well, that becomes like, well, how much do you reveal? And I think your book will help to sort of like make that a lot easier to for people as well. Sort of like, well, how do I package that up in the right situations? It's like, well, maybe at immigration, they might not, saying that you've lived in Iran for 3 years out the bat might not be a good plan if you're trying to get in the US. But
absolutely. I think, yeah, And you got to think about these things. That's why I talk about figuring out when do you reveal who you are and how do you use it also to make sure that it's helpful. Okay. And then the very last thing I'll bring up is, of course, the very practical aspects of moving abroad. Once you've done all this, then you use this in terms of figuring out the right school for your child. Then you figure out what do you need from the HR of the company that moves you. Okay, then you're very clear and upfront, and you'll be very quick to say, look, I need on the ground relocation assistance. Okay, where are the relocate gurus? I need to know what happens once I'm on the ground, who's going to help me? Because look, I'm Pakistani, I'm coming on an Italian passport, my husband's work visa is on a German passport, my kid has Chinese birth certificate and an Arabic birth certificate, and I need to have a Ghana residence ID as soon as possible. Okay, and you know you need on the ground help to do all of this. You know you need to choose the right school and tell them, look, our kids have 3 languages at home, and then you're going to be teaching them English and French, and how are you going to assess their learning? How are you going to help me prioritize their multilingual learning? You need to talk to the school about that. You need to figure out so many things, and if you aren't comfortable or know who you are, how are you going to do all of that? Who's going to help you? Nobody. It's up to you to know what you want and then ask and look for the right support. And every international family can massively benefit from doing that.
That's amazing. So the takeaway from this is that thank you so much for everyone for joining our very messy conversation today. So to break it down, so tip 1, understand it's going to be messy. It's going to be challenging, but it's going to be worth it. Tip 2, don't forget your culture. And understand what that is and how it shapes your life and your view of the world.
Absolutely.
Tip 3 was the languages.
Yes.
Make sure you have a plan for the languages of your home languages, the languages that you've been brought up with, and the languages of the country that you're moving to. What is important? And then finally, sort of like all the places where you go to, that sort of like become part of who you are. Sort of like, don't think that just because you live somewhere for a couple of years or even just 6 months that it isn't going to impact the rest of your life. You can't box it off. It's going to be part of your story. Own it and live and be a part of it, and don't think that you can just shut it off, and don't hide it from yourself. So I think those are 3 tips, right? Does that kind of summarize it?
Yes, definitely. And I hope that it helps other people and other families who are embarking on this journey or who are living this journey already to know, hey, you're not alone. We're all in this together and we're all figuring this out together. And I hope it helps them look at their lives in this way and really appreciate how great it is. The opportunities that are coming their way are truly amazing. And it's an incredible lifestyle, very enriching, and yes, it's messy, but it's also really beautiful. So it's complicated and beautiful. That's the messy mobile life.
Fantastic. So if people want to get the book, where can they get it from, and how do they get access to it?
You are able to buy the book on Amazon, or if you want to read it on Kindle, you're welcome to. You can download it on Kindle via Barnes & Noble, through ebook, Nook, Kobo. I'm happy to give the links to Nicole if she wants to put them up or share them. So yeah, and actually today is the launch date. Today is the day that the paperback is released, the 11th of April. So you can have the book shipped to you regardless of where you are. And if you are in Bangkok, I will see you soon. If you are in Dubai, I will see you soon. And if you are in Ghana, I'll see you soon. So if you're interested in buying the book in person and you live in any of these locations, let me know.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to be coming to the launch. It's going to be
so good to see you there, Nicole. It'll be fun.
Feel free to add any questions that, if you've got any questions or facing any challenges that you would like Mariam to sort of answer for you, pop them in the comments below and keep the conversation going. If you have any tips or challenges We'd love to hear what they are and help you out. And I'll be sharing all the links for the book, and you can find out more about Miriam and her story on her blog, and then we move to. So I'll share all the links below. And I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope you found this message chat useful for you too. So thank you so much for joining us again, Mariam.
Thank you, Nicole, and I'm very excited to see you soon. So see you in a couple of weeks.
And yeah, so feel free to download the Relocate Guru app, and it will be a place to help everyone make moving easier and feel at home anywhere. So have a great day, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Download the app today and join our community to feel at home anywhere.